Dragon Seed could be the most amazing narrative ever, but it's impossible to look past the casting. This is a 1944 film directed by Jack Conway and Harold S. Bucquet, and it's written by Marguerite Roberts and Jane Murfin, based on the novel by Pearl S. Buck. And the reason the casting ruins the film is because Katharine Hepburn's not Asian. And part of me is completely baffled by this. Part of me doesn't feel surprised for 1940s Hollywood. I love Katharine Hepburn. This is the reason I wanted to watch this film, but I find it really awkward and uncomfortable. And it could have been a really fascinating film because there are bits of the narrative that feel quite intense, quite dramatic. It's certainly an interesting idea, but I can't look past the white people playing Asians. This is about a Chinese village that's invaded by Japanese. And it's an interesting concept because I feel like there are a lot of emotions in this film. And there are times when things feel quite intense and uncertain, and characters are faced with difficult situations. And Katharine Hepburn's character, Jade, does have an interesting role to play. She doesn't just take this invasion lying down. She's very headstrong and determined, and she breaks the mold of what's expected of her. For example, she's a woman, but she wants to learn to read, which I think is, a really interesting take on the character and her personality. The character is a very well written character, but played by Katharine Hepburn, who I absolutely love. It's just very difficult to watch, and I'm kind of glad they don't put on accents, but at the same time, that's also a bad thing. And I realize I'm contradicting myself, but they talk with American accents, which when they're playing, Chinese characters, that's a bit strange, very strange, in fact. But I feel like it probably would have been worse if they'd tried to put on accents. I think it would have been unwatchable if they'd put on accents. But of course, I don't know because that's not what they did, so I'm not entirely sure how I'd feel about that. But I realise that I was going to say there are pros and cons of both, but I feel like it's more just a case of there are very strong cons of doing it both ways. So I don't know how to respond to this film because it could have been a really interesting story and it could have been a really compelling narrative with certainly a very well-written protagonist. And I can't fault Katharine Hepburn's performance. I don't really want to fault anybody's performance. They had the material, they were given their direction, and they performed a role. They did a job. But it doesn't mean that it's very comfortable to watch. Do I recommend it? Out of curiosity, I think it's worth checking out. But as a good film, I'd say no. If you're interested in the story, I'd say read the novel. I haven't read the novel. I didn't even know it existed until watching this film, but it can't be a more uncomfortable experience than watching a predominantly white American cast performing as Asian characters. The novel has to be a better experience. If anybody's read the novel, please feel free to share what it's like. As I said, it seems like a pretty interesting story that could have been really fascinating with some really interesting characters. And yes, there are times when I felt that, but I struggled. I struggled to look past even the wonderful Katharine Hepburn playing these characters. So it's an interesting experience. Interesting might not necessarily mean a good experience. If you're curious, I'd say check it out. But I would be keen to know what the novel is like. I don't know if I'd ever read it, maybe one day. But for now, having seen the film is definitely more than enough for me for now.